Afternoon, friends and strangers. Um, Welcome back to my series where I read Slapstick, Lonesome No More by Vonnegut. And, yeah, in case it isn't the best reading, you try reading the pages when they're all, like, bubbly like this. Come on. Look how, it's all, this is all fucked up. I'm borrowing this book from my bestest friend, and she left it in the rain. Well, she didn't leave it in the rain. She got caught in the rain while had it with her. So it is wet. It smells funny, and it's hard to read because the pages are all perforated and what have you. Without any further ado, let's get down to it. This is chapter 19. It is sundown again. A bird down around 31st Street and 5th, where there is an army tank with a tree growing out of its turret, calls out to me. It asks the same question over and over again with piercing clarity. Whip poor Will? It says, I never call that bird a whippoorwill, and neither do Melody and Isidore, who follow my lead in naming things. They seldom call Manhattan, Manhattan, for example, or the Island of Death, which is its common name on the mainland. They do as I do. They call it Skyscraper National Park. Without knowing what the joke is in that, or with equal humorlessness, Angkor Wat. And what they call the bird that asks about whipping when the sun goes down is what Eliza and I called it when we were children. It was a correct name which I had learned from a dictionary. We treasured the name for the superstitious dread it inspired. The bird became a nightmare creature in a painting by Hieronymus Bosch when we spoke its name. And whenever we heard its cry, we spoke its name simultaneously. It was almost the only occasion on which we would speak simultaneously. The cry of the nocturnal goat-sucker, we would say. And now I hear Melody and Isidore saying that too, in a part of the lobby where I cannot see them. The cry of the nocturnal goat-sucker, they say. Eliza and I listened to that bird one evening before my departure for Cape Cod. We had fled the mansion for the privacy of the dank mausoleum of Professor Elihu Roosevelt Swain. Whip poor Will? Came the question from somewhere out under the apple trees. Even when we put our heads together, we could think of little to say. I have heard that condemned prisoners often think of themselves as dead people long before they die. Perhaps that was how our genius felt, knowing that a cruel axeman, so to speak, was about to split it into two nondescript chunks of meat, into Betty and Bobby Brown. Be that as it may, our hands were busy, which is often the case with the hands of dying people. We had brought what we thought were the best of our writings with us. We rolled them into a cylinder, which we hid in an empty bronze funerary urn. The urn had been intended for the ashes of the wife of Professor Swain, who had chosen to be buried here in New York instead. It was encrusted with verdigris. Hi-ho. What was on the papers? A method for squaring circles, I remember, and a utopian scheme for creating artificial extended families in America by issuing everyone a new middle name. All persons with the same middle name would be relatives. Yes, and there was our critique of Darwin's theory of evolution, and an essay on the nature of gravity, which concluded that gravity had surely been a variable in ancient times. There was a paper, I remember, which argued that teeth should be washed with hot water, just like dishes and pots and pans, and so on. It was Eliza who had thought of hiding the papers in the urn. It was Eliza who now put the lid in place. We were not close together when she did it, So what she said was her own invention. Say goodbye forever to your intelligence, Bobby Brown. Goodbye, I said. Eliza, I said, so many of the books I've read to you say that love was the most important thing of all. Maybe I should tell you that I love you now. Go ahead, she said. I love you, Eliza, I said. She thought about it. No, she said at last. I don't like it. Why not? I said. It's as though you were pointing a gun at my head, she said. It's just a way of getting somebody to say something they probably don't mean. What else can I say, or anybody say, but, I love you too? You don't love me? I said. What could anybody love about Bobby Brown? She said. Somewhere outside, under the apple trees, the nocturnal goat-sucker asked his question again. Chapter 20. Eliza did not come down to breakfast the next morning. She remained in her room until I was gone. Our parents came along with me in their chauffeur-driven Mercedes limousine. I was their child with a future. I could read and write. And even as we rolled through the lovely countryside, my forgettery set to work. It was a protective mechanism against unbearable grief, one which I, as a pediatrician, am persuaded all children have. Somewhere behind me, it seemed, was a twin sister who was not nearly as smart as I was. She had a name. Her name was Eliza Mellon Swain. Yes, and the school year was so structured that none of us ever had to go home. I went to England and France and Germany and Italy and Greece. I went to summer camp. And it was determined that, while I was surely no genius, and was incapable of originality, I had a better-than-average mind. I was patient and orderly, and could sort out good ideas from heaps of balderdash. I was the first child in the history of the school to take college boards. I did so well, I was invited to come to Harvard. I accepted the invitation, although my voice had yet to change. I would now and then be reminded by my parents, who became very proud of me, that somewhere I had a twin sister who was little more than a human vegetable. She was in an inexpensive institution for people of her sort. She was only a name. Father was killed in an automobile accident during my first year in medical school. He had thought enough of me to name me an executor of his will, and I was visited in Boston soon after by a fat and shifty-eyed attorney named Norman Mushari, Jr. He told me what seemed at first to be a rambling and irrelevant story about a woman who had been locked away for many years against her will in an institution for the feeble-minded. She had hired him, he said, to sue her relatives and the institution for damages, to gain her release at once, and to recover all inheritances which had been wrongly withheld. She had a name, which, of course, was Eliza Mellon Swain. 21. Mother would say later of the hospital where we abandoned Eliza to limbo, "It wasn't a cheap hospital, you know. It cost $200 a day, and the doctors begged us to stay away. Didn't they, Wilbur?" "I think so, Mother," I said, and then I told the truth. I forget. I was not only a stupid Bobby Brown, but a conceited one. Though only a first-year medical student with the genitalia of an infant field mouse, I was the master of a great house on Beacon Hill. I was driven to and from school in a Jaguar, and I had already taken to dressing as I would dress when President of the United States, like a medical mountebank during the era of Chester Alan Arthur, say. There was a party there nearly every night. I would customarily make an appearance of only a few minutes, smoking hashish in a meerschaum pipe, and wearing an emerald green water silk dressing gown. A pretty girl came up to me at one of those parties, and she said to me, You are so ugly, you're the sexiest thing I ever saw. I know, I said. I know. I know. Mother visited me a lot on Beacon Hill, where I had a special suit built just for her. Where I had a special suite built just for her, sorry. And I visited her a lot in Turtle Bay. Yes, and reporters came to question us in both places after Norman Mushari Jr. got Eliza out of the hospital. It was a big story. It was always a big story when multimillionaires mistreated their own relatives. Hi-ho. It was embarrassing, and should have been, of course. We had not seen Eliza yet. We had not been able to reach her by telephone. Meanwhile, though, she said justly insulting things about us almost every day in the press. All we had to show reporters was a copy of a telegram we had sent Eliza, in care of her lawyer, and Eliza's reply to it. Our telegram said, "We love you, your mother and brother." Eliza's telegram said this, "I love you too, Eliza." Eliza would not allow herself to be photographed. She had her lawyer buy a confessional booth from a church which was being torn down. She sat inside it when she granted interviews for television, and Mother and I watched those interviews in agony, holding hands. And Eliza's rowdy contralto had become so unfamiliar to us that we thought there might be an imposter in the booth. But it was Eliza, all right. I remember a television reporter asked her, "How did you spend your time in the hospital, Miss Swain?" "Singing," she said. "Singing anything in particular?" he said. "The same song, over and over again," she said. "What song was that?" he said. "Some day my prince will come," she told him. "And did you have some specific prince in mind as your rescuer?" he said. "My twin brother," she said. "But he's a swine, of course. He never came." Mother and I surely did not oppose Eliza and her lawyer in any way, so she easily regained control of her wealth, and nearly the first thing she did was to buy half interest in the New England Patriots professional football team. This purchase resulted in more publicity. Eliza would still not come out of the booth for cameras, but Mushari promised the world that she was now wearing a New England Patriots blue and gold jersey in there. She was asked in this particular interview if she kept up with current events, to which she replied, "I certainly don't blame the Chinaman for going home. This had to do with the Republic of China's closing its embassy in Washington. The miniaturization of human beings in China had progressed so far at that point that their ambassador was only 60 centimeters tall. His farewell was polite and friendly. He said his country was severing relations simply because there was no longer anything going on in the United States, which was of any interest to the Chinese at all." Eliza was asked to say why the Chinaman had been so right. "What civilized country could be interested in a hellhole like America," she said, "where everybody takes such lousy care of their own relatives?" And then one day she and Mushari were seen crossing the Massachusetts Avenue Bridge from Cambridge to Boston on foot. It was a warm and sunny day. Eliza was carrying a parasol. She was wearing the jersey of her football team. My God, was that poor girl ever a mess. She was so bent over that her face was on level with Mushari's, and Mushari was about the size of Napoleon Bonaparte. She was chain-smoking. She was coughing her head off. Mushari was wearing a white suit. He carried a cane. He wore a red rose in his lapel. And he and his client were soon joined by a friendly crowd, and by newspaper photographers and television crews. And my mother and I watched them on television, in horror, may I say, for the parade was coming ever closer to my house on Beacon Hill. "Oh, Wilbur, Wilbur, Wilbur," said my mother as we watched. "Is that really your sister?" I made a bitter joke, without smiling. "Either your only daughter, Mother, or the sort of anteater known as an aardvark," I said. Oh God, I love this book so much. It's the only reason I'm reading it. I know no one's going to watch it or enjoy it, but this is just an excuse to read the book out loud, so fuck off and die. 23. Mother was not up to a confrontation with Eliza. She retreated to her suite upstairs. Nor did I want the servants to witness whatever grotesque performance Eliza had in mind, so I sent them to their quarters. When the doorbell rang, I myself answered the door. I smiled at the aardvark and the cameras and the crowd. "Eliza, dear sister, what a pleasant surprise! Come in, I said. For form's sake, I made a tentative gesture as though I might touch her. She drew back. "You touch me, Lord Fauntleroy, and I'll bite you and you'll die of rabies," she said. Policemen kept the crowd from following Eliza and Mushari into the house, and I closed the drapes on the windows so no one could see in. When I was sure we had privacy, I said to her bleakly, "What brings you here?" "Lust for your perfect body, Wilbur," she said. She coughed and laughed. "Is dear Mater here, or dear Pater?" She corrected herself. "Oh dear, Pater is dead, isn't he? Or is it dear Mater? It's so hard to tell." "Mother is in Turtle Bay, Eliza," I lied, inwardly. I was swooning with sorrow and loathing and guilt. I estimated that her crushed rib cage had the capacity of a box of kitchen matches. Oof. The room was beginning to smell like a distillery. Eliza had a problem with alcohol as well. Her skin was bad. She had a complexion like our great-grandmother's steamer trunk. Turtle Bay, she mused. "Did it ever occur to you, dear brother, that dear father was not our father at all?" "What do you mean?" I said. "Perhaps Mother stole from the bed and out of the house on a moonlit night," she said, "and mated with a giant sea turtle in Turtle Bay." Hi-ho. "Eliza," I said, "if we are going to discuss family matters, perhaps Mr. Mushari should leave us alone." "Why?" she said. "Normie is the only family I have." Now, I said. "That overdressed sparrow fart of a mother of yours is surely no relative of mine," she said. Now, I said. "And you don't consider yourself a relative of mine, do you?" she said. "What can I say?" I said. "That's why we're visiting you, to hear all the wonderful things you have to say," she said. "You're always the brainy one. I was just some kind of tumor that had to be removed from your side." "I never said that," I said. "Other people said it, and you believe them," she said. "That's worse. You're a fascist, Wilbur." "That's what you are." "That's absurd," I said. "Fascists are inferior people who believe it when somebody tells them they're superior," she said. Now, I said. Then they want everybody else to die," she said. "This is getting us nowhere," I said. "I'm used to getting nowhere," she said, "as you may have read in the papers and seen on television." "Eliza," I said, "would it help at all for you to know that Mother will be sick for the rest of our lives about that awful thing we did to you?" "How could that help?" she said. "That's the dumbest question I ever heard." She looped a great arm over the great shoulders of Norman Mushari, Jr. "Here's who knows how to help people," she said. I nodded. "We're grateful to him. We really are. He is my mother and my father and my brother and God, all wrapped up in one," she said. "He gave me the gift of life. He said to me, 'Money isn't going to make you feel any better, sweetheart, but we're going to sue the piss out of your relatives anyway.'" I said. "But it sure helps a hell of a lot more than your expressions of guilt, I must say. Those are just boasts about your own wonderful sensibilities." She laughed unpleasantly. "But I can see where you and Mother might want to boast about your guilt. After all, it's the only thing you two monkeys ever earned." Hi-ho. 24. I assumed that Eliza had now assaulted my self-respect with every weapon she had. I had somehow survived. Without pride, with a clinical and cynical sort of interest, I noted that I had a cast-iron character which would repel attacks. Apparently, even if I declined to put up defenses of any other kind. How wrong I was about Eliza's having expended her fury. Her opening attacks had been aimed merely at exposing the cast iron in my character. She had merely sent out light patrols to cut down the trees and shrubs in front of my character, to strip it of its vines, so to speak. And now, without my realizing it, the shell of my character stood before her, concealed howitzers at nearly point-blank range, as naked and brittle as a Franklin stove. Hi-ho. There was a lull. Eliza prowled about my living room, looking at my books, which she couldn't read, of course. Then she returned to me, and she cocked her head, and she said, "People get into Harvard Medical School because they can read and write." "I worked very hard, Eliza," I said. "It wasn't easy for me. It isn't easy now." "If Bobby Brown becomes a doctor," she said, "that will be the strongest argument I ever heard for the Christian Scientists." "I will not be the best doctor there ever was," I said, but I won't be the worst either." "You might be a very good man with a gong," she said. She was alluding to recent rumors that Chinese had had a remarkable success in treating breast cancer with the music of ancient gongs. "You look like a man," she said, "who could hit a gong almost every time." "Thank you," I said. "Touch me," she said. "Pardon me," I said. "I'm your own flesh. I'm your sister. Touch me," she said. "Yes, of course," I said, but my arms seemed queerly paralyzed. "Take your time," she said. "Well," I said, "since you hate me so." "I hate Bobby Brown," she said. "Since you hate Bobby Brown," I said. "And Betty Brown," she said. "That was so long ago," I said. "Touch me," she said. "Oh, Christ, Eliza," I said. My arm still wouldn't move. "I'll touch you," she said. "Whatever you say," I said. I was scared stiff. "You don't have a heart condition, do you, Wilbur?" she said. "No," I said. "If I touch you, you promise you won't die?" "Yes," I said. "Maybe I'll die," she said. "I hope not," I said. "Just because I act like I know what's going to happen," she said, "doesn't mean I know what's going to happen. Maybe nothing will happen." "Maybe," I said. "I've never seen you so frightened," she said. "I'm human," I said. "You want to tell Normie what you're scared about?" she said. "No," I said. Eliza, with her fingertips almost brushing my cheek, quoted from a dirty joke Withers Witherspoon had told another servant when we were children. We had heard it through a wall. The joke had to do with a woman who was wildly responsive during sexual intercourse. In the joke, the woman warned a stranger who was beginning to make love to her. Eliza passed on the sultry warning to me. "Keep your hat on, Buster. We may wind up miles from here." Then she touched me, and we became a single genius again. "25. We went berserk. It was only by the grace of God that we did not tumble out of the house and into the crowd on Beacon Street. Some parts of us, of which I had not been at all aware, of which Eliza had been excruciatingly aware, had been planning a reunion for a long, long time. I could no longer tell whether I stopped and Eliza I could no longer tell where I stopped and Eliza began, or where Eliza and I stopped and the universe began. It was gorgeous and it was horrible. Yes, and let this be a measure of the quantity of energy involved. The orgy went on for 5 whole days and nights. Eliza and I slept for 3 days after that. When I at last woke up, I found myself in my own bed. I was being fed intravenously. Eliza, as I later found out, had been taken to her own home in a private ambulance. As for why nobody broke us up or summoned help, Eliza and I captured Norman Mushari Jr. and poor mother and the servants, one by one. I have no memory of doing this. We tied them to wooden chairs and gagged them, apparently, and set them neatly around the dining room table. We gave them food and water, thank heavens, or we would have been murderers. We would not let them go to the toilet, however, and fed them nothing but peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Apparently I left the house several times to get more bread and jelly and peanut butter, and then the orgy would begin again. I remember reading out loud to Eliza from books on pediatrics and child psychology and sociology and anthropology and so on. I had never thrown away any book from any course I had taken. I remember writhing embraces which alternated with periods of my sitting at my typewriter with Eliza beside me. I was typing something with superhuman speed. Hi-ho. When I came out from my coma, Mushari and my own lawyers had already paid my servants handsomely for the agony they had suffered at the dinner table, and for their silence as to the dreadful things they had seen. Mother had been released from Massachusetts General Hospital, and was back in Turtle Bay. Physically, I had suffered from exhaustion and nothing more. When I was allowed to rise, however, I was so damaged psychologically that I expected to find everything unfamiliar. If gravity had become variable on that day, as it in fact did many years later, if I had had to crawl about my house on my hands and knees, as I often do now, I would have thought it a highly appropriate response by the universe to all I had been through. But little had changed. The house was tidy. The books were back in their shelves. A broken thermostat had been replaced. 3 dining room chairs had been sent out for repairs. The dining room carpet was somewhat piebald, pale spots indicating where stains had been removed. The one proof that something extraordinary had happened was itself a paradigm of tidiness. It was a manuscript on a coffee table in the living room, where I had typed so furiously during the nightmare. Eliza and I had somehow written a manual on child rearing. Was it any good? Not really. It was only good enough to become, after the Bible and the Joy of Cooking, the most popular book of all time. Hi-ho. I found it so helpful that when I began to practice pediatrics in Vermont, that I had it published under a pseudonym, Dr. Eli W. Rockmell, M.D., a sort of garbling of Eliza's and my names. The publisher thought up a title, which was, So You Went and Had a Baby. During our orgy, though, Eliza and I gave the manuscript a very different title and sort of authorship, which was this: The Cry of the Nocturnal Goatsucker, by Betty and Bobby Brown. I guess we'll pick up more later. Like I said, nobody's watched the first 3 parts yet. But, I'm seriously just doing this for my own amusement. I don't even have any subscribers. I don't know. I don't care. If anything, if you think these videos are boring, and if you think my face is ugly and my voice is annoying, which both of those things are true, and if you agree with me, you'll do me the favor and honor of going out and buying this book yourself. Read it yourself. If you don't want me to read it, if you can afford literature, I know I can't, so my friend bought this book and lent it to me. But if you want to hear this story and read this story and love it as I do, but you don't want to listen to my grating voice and look at me, which I I really can't blame you. Please go out and buy this book, and at least let me know that you bought this book because I said you should do it. Because you should. And Kurt Vonnegut says that you should too, even though he died. But yeah, so have a great day. Stay tuned, or don't stay tuned. But I'm still gonna put out part 5 anyway. Or would it be? Yeah, part 5. Okay. Goodbye.